Hello, class. So this week we're going to be discussing Chela Sandoval's essay in Methodology of the Oppressed, as well as a film that you were supposed to be reviewing this week. There's not much updates as far as the class course goes. I'll be posting the final exam review guide on Canva for everybody to start to look over as we go into the last few weeks of the semester. I want to say that I'm super thankful for everybody's critical engagement throughout the whole semester. Each of your responses have been very rewarding to read. I can tell that all of you are engaging with the materials inside and outside of the classroom. And I'm just really happy that a lot of you are gaining new insights and new perspectives and frameworks for how to think about these categories of race, gender, and sexuality. So for this week, you're expected to watch this film. I also want you to check out this video by Chela Sandoval on her analysis of the methodology of the oppressed. And we're going to just jump right into this week's lecture, like always. So I believe last week we talked a little bit about how movement organizing begins, how social justice organizing happens. For any of you who are thinking about courses for next semester or the summer, we do offer social justice class. I teach an intro to social justice class for anybody that is looking for the similar kind of structure that we've had in this course for that semester, the summer semester as well. So moving on, Chela Sandoval has the essay that you were supposed to read is titled U.S. Third World Feminism, the Theory and Method of Oppositional Consciousness in the Postmodern World. And Chela Sandoval actually, she is a Chicana scholar who started to theorize and write mostly about collective organizing and people of color's consciousness around the 80s, 90s. And she was also a scholar of a Gloria Anzaldúa scholar. She is part of the Chicana canon that we've been engaging with this whole semester. And I really like to assign her this piece at the end of the semester because she's really giving us a tool and a methodology to engage in organizing. She says, what does US third world feminism do? She says that it provides a different way of conceptualizing US feminist consciousness. At this time, around the 90s and early 2000s, this type of feminism was predominantly in a term, US third world feminism, was often employed by different women of color writers at the time. She said that Chela Sandoval also believed that it joins worldwide movements of social justice together, that US third world feminism has this ability to join worldwide movements of social justice together. And some of the key words that we're going to be thinking about is this notion of oppositional consciousness and decolonization, which I'm heard many of you have heard or seen on social media. Decolonize your diet, decolonize your relationship to this or that. It's a very common term, and we're going to think a little bit about this history of where it comes from and who are the foundational writers who started this field. In addition to thinking about the contributions of US third world feminism to the broader scope of social justice and scholarship and the academy, Sandoval says that US third world feminist theory existed, quote unquote, just outside of the dominant feminist theory that was emerging in the 1970s. And she says that this was kind of how women of color feminism or US third world feminism existed outside of dominant theory. And I want you to think about in your responses how that this notion of the outside and inside, this dichotomy or this binary that is presented, how is it useful or limiting? How is it helpful in helping us to see how US feminist discourse was considered outside of dominant hegemonic discourse, and why might it not be useful to think about feminist discourse outside of something? And this is really just for your personal critical thinking. It's not necessarily going to be graded whether you're right or wrong. This is just for you to think through. Now, for this response, I really want you to check out this video here by Chela Sandoval that has an excellent breakdown of what is US third world feminism. So really important for you to watch this video and to discuss it in your response for this week. Now, what is oppositional political activity and consciousness? What does Sandoval mean when she's referring to this? For Sandoval, oppositional political activity and consciousness is a method where oppositional ideologies can meet. And by oppositional ideologies, this is an example, can be conservative ideologies with liberal ideologies. And oppositional political activity and consciousness is a method that allows for these two opposing frameworks or opposing ideas to work together despite their differences. She says that this possibility is important in this postmodern world that we currently live in. And at the time, this was a common term that was used to describe this early period of going into the 2000s. We're obviously at a different period then, but it is helpful to think about how scholars were conceptualizing this new era. Sandoval is also tracing spaces where oppositional practices emerge. In other words, she's doing case studies and research on these moments in history where this method of oppositional practices is happening, where people who are engaging in who have different frameworks, different racial backgrounds, different cultural backgrounds, religious backgrounds, how they engage in coalitional organizing. She says that this is she's looking at these spaces and tracing where these spaces happen, and this is the examples that she's using is the civil rights movement, the women's movement, and other ethnic, racial, and gender liberation movements. So for example, one of the examples that I can think of contemporary is I'm part of an organization called the Abolish ICE Coalition, and it's a coalition that incorporates several different organizations across the tri-state area, both in New Jersey and in New York. And what all of these organizations have in common is this desire to free people who are in detention and close down detention facilities. However, what is interesting is that all of these different organizations have different frameworks, different mission statements, and different ways of going about to get to that goal. For Sandoval, her book and this article provides a method for which organizations can rely on to be able to work together. And this method doesn't just have to be for organizing strategies or running campaigns or trying to teach other people about your differences, but it can also be used to think about it on an interpersonal level with your friends, your family members, or classmates. This notion of oppositional consciousness, or this notion of the ideological state, comes from a scholar by the name of Louis Althusser. His theory of ideology and the ideological state apparatuses stated that all citizens endure ideological subjugation. So this means that everyone is vulnerable to some type of ideological agenda, whether it's by the state, the nation, local organizations. But according to Althusser, it is possible for individuals and groups to challenge and transform the current hierarchical nature and the social order. But this is where his theory is used by Sandoval. She says Sandoval uses her theory as by building this notion of the oppositional consciousness by saying that in practice, it can be produced and reproduced within communities that oppose each other. She says that in practice, this theory has the potential for the subject citizen, sort of the person who is very steeped in the nation's ideologies, the nation's goals. She says that this person has the potential to learn how to quote unquote identify, develop, and control the means of ideology from within and outside. So, in other words, this method, this oppositional consciousness practice that she traces, and we're going to talk about exactly what it is in a minute, but she says that this method is helpful for people to understand how ideologies are shaped, how what becomes natural or set in stone or part of society, how those things happen. And she says that this method can be employed for people who are part of the system or outside of the system. And once again, we're going back to this analysis of inside and outside. So I want you to be thinking about that and how that binary also coincides with other binary frameworks we've learned about in the course, such as native and um, civilized, or nature versus nurture, biology and scientific objectivity versus the emotional, illogical, um, material, affective um, aspect of society that is subjective. Um, for Sandoval, this theory of oppositional consciousness and practice allows people to be able to strategically understand ideologies that they are a part of or influenced by in order to break out of those ideologies and from within and outside and develop new ones. She says that this method can help liberation movements that face internal struggles and division. Here is the important part. She says that in terms of this class and why I signed this reading, she helps us provide by providing us with a great example. She says that there's 5 main categories of organization within social justice movements, and these are the 5 frameworks that we've been engaging with. She says there's one, the equal rights, where it's the framework of women are the same as men. Women should have the same equal access as men. And we talked a little bit about this framework with the early suffragette movement, white feminist movements, and all of those early renditions of feminism that still impact the way that a lot of people think about feminism. And the mainstream hegemonic form of feminism is typically associated with this number 1. Second is revolutionary, this notion that women are inherently different from men and that there needs to be an entirely new system set in place altogether because of these differences. The other is supremacist. Women are superior. We've seen these in some of the lesbian ideological frameworks or feminist frameworks that are about women being superior to men, right? We've seen some of those frameworks as well. There's also the separatist framework, which is this notion of women are a racially divided class, that women should be separated from different parts of society, and that there should be an entire different systems that separate these gender categories more explicitly. And then for Sandoval, there is this 5th point, the differential. She says differential consciousness is the expression of the new subject position called for by Althusser. It permits functioning within yet beyond the demands of dominant theology. So this 5-point, this 5th mode, which we'll call it, this 5th mode of differential consciousness, it's almost like a flexible place that one can sit in that allows for this new subject position, this new framework, this new capacity to understand. She says that this moment happens in the 5th step and has been part of US third world feminism, or as maybe we would like to call it now, women of color feminism, since the 1960s. Her main thesis here is that US third world feminism refuses to submit to mainstream hegemonic or dominant feminist practices due to their loyalty to differential consciousness. In other words, women of color feminists have always known how to engage in this 5th differential mode that allows you to move in between different frameworks and different understandings. So maybe one moment you agree with the equal rights frameworks, but you see these different important categories that need to be organized as well. We see this with Kimberly Crenshaw's analysis of intersectionality, pointing to the importance of not just sitting with a racial framework that is a single axis framework, but also thinking about gender and class and sexuality. We've talked about Native studies and the importance of acknowledging indigeneity into feminist discourse. So all of these are part of this canon of women of color feminism that we've been learning about. And Sandoval is really saying here that this type of scholarship, this type of canon, this type of knowledge production sits within this inherently oppositional space. And that it's not just limited to one framework, that it's constantly moving in between different frameworks to understand and build coalitions with different people from different racial, ethnic, gender, sexual backgrounds that allow us the ability to be able to organize with one another. She says that the fifth and differential method of opposition